Good morning on this Sunday, February 9th, and welcome to the Georgia Gang. Georgia lawmakers hit the brakes on the session to take a deep dive into the budget as tensions rise between the governor and the speaker. The president hints that there may be one too many Republicans in Georgia's second Senate race. Could a compromise be in the works? And do you want to turn your clocks back or don't you? Lawmakers want to hear from you. Darren, Phil, Janelle, and Kathy are all here. The debate and discussion begin right now.
From the Fox 5 studios, the Georgia Gang starts now.
It's a showdown over the state budget, and lawmakers have hit pause on the 2020 legislative session as they work on proposed cuts. And as we learned this week, it's never an easy or pretty process.
The decisions that are made on the budget touch the lives of every Georgia citizen.
A solemn reminder from Georgia House Speaker David Ralston as several lawmakers head home while others stay to try and crunch numbers over the next 2 weeks. Governor Brian Kemp ordered state agencies to trim their budgets by 4% this year and 6% next year, while trying to make good on a promise of a teacher pay raise of another $2,000.
We understand there's a tight budget situation across the state this year, and the House needed a little bit more time to review the information that they're receiving from the state agencies, because we get one chance to get this right.
Speaker Ralston says House members have concerns about cuts in the areas of public safety and accountability courts, while Republican House leaders try to make good on a promise of another income tax cut. Well, lawmakers will hold budget hearings all this week and return back for the 13th day of the session on February 18th. Now, Phil, this is not uncommon to have these types of spats. I think during, Governor Deal, they happened behind closed doors, and Chris Riley took care of a lot of them behind closed doors. I think, I covered more than 13 sessions. I remember back to Glenn Richardson and Casey Cagle, Governor Perdue, and, Glenn Richardson, and, you go back to Governor Barnes. This is not uncommon, especially when you're talking about budget cuts.
Well, you're right. There have been pauses. You could even go back to when the Democrats ran things between the fiery exchanges between Zell Miller, who was Lieutenant Governor, and Speaker Murphy. Now, I will say this, with the pause, yes, they do have to get on the same page, the governor and the speaker. And I don't understand why you had to pause with other bills. I thought that was a mistake. I think they could have gone on with some of the other bills. I think that the speaker suffered a defeat last week. It kind of ties into this budget thing because of the partisan primary bill that was first floated, and it has to do with the U.S. Senate race. I know we'll talk about that later. And the governor won that round, but when you win, in my opinion, you should have just moved on and not doubled down. And so I think that now the appropriations committees for both the House and the Senate are going to have to look especially at some of the reductions that Democrats and Republicans are concerned about.
Well, Theron, this is the budget process, and it can be messy, and Democrats are not happy about the cuts, and they're going to take this out onto the campaign trail. How will this affect, especially the House?
Yeah, it's going to affect everyone. And let me just say this. As someone who's a registered lobbyist who's at the Capitol every single day, I can tell you I work with both offices. I work with the governor's office. I work with the speaker's office. I know the speaker and the governor both personally. And I would tell you that I think the rift between them is being a little overblown a little bit in the media. These are both Georgians who really want to do the right thing about what their issues are. And more importantly, what they're really debating, Lori, is the process, which I think you're getting at. And so it's not a debate of whether, this person doesn't like that person. They definitely have both said some things to each other. But I do think that the speaker was right in basically saying, hey, let's pause for a second. And I was talking to Kathy before we got on the show. We remember back in 2010 that they took off upwards to 10 legislative days to work out a budget, and the session went into the end of April at that time. And so for our viewers, it's not unprecedented for a speaker to say, hey, let's take 8 legislative days to do the process. But now you're right. Democrats have an opportunity during these 8 legislative days to really figure out the budget, to figure out what are the things that they want to try to negotiate. But more importantly, everyone's got to get back to their districts, and sometime hopefully in April to start campaigning, because a lot of them are all of them are on the ballot in May.
Kathy, you had a lot to say last week about the process. Weigh in here.
Well, I think there's some schooling going on here, and I think the speaker's got the upper hand right now, because you got to get the budget out of the House this budget came over with some big cuts that are dangerous for folks when you've got 16 seats that are contested and in play for this next election. The Speaker's got to protect his people from votes that they don't want to take. So, you know, he's shutting the process down. The reason other legislation isn't going forward is it is all up for the horse trade. So what we'll see is when they come back, they'll have a new budget, and then a whole slew of stuff will start moving, and you'll be able to tell who got what.
Well, Janelle, let's talk about the political dynamic that's playing out here, because the Speaker, he's very protective of his House members, Republican and Democratic. So, you know, where do you think there's room for compromise?
Yeah, see, that's where it gets a little tricky. And just kind of go back to what you're saying, too, about the campaign piece, right? So when you are in an election year, the biggest thing is how do we communicate what's happening to the voters? Because we're hearing it from a very high level perspective. Pretty much all the voters know is that there is tension. And that's not something that looks good on the Republican side as it relates to, you know, just creating this unnecessary tension is kind of how we see it. So I think disclosing what's happening and what is behind the tension is something that's really important as well, so that people can accurately understand what's going on.
Phil, I mentioned it in the piece, but you know, the governor is holding strong on this $2,000 pay raise that would total about $5,000 for teachers. And then we heard from the Speaker this week that he, you know, wants to fulfill a promise of an income tax cut. What do we see balancing out here?
Well, I think that somebody's got to give. In fact, I would advocate that they have a meeting bring in the Lieutenant Governor too, to have a meeting between the Governor and the Speaker to hash this out. Because basically, you can fulfill probably one of those promises next year. What promise will it be? That's what you have to hash out. It's got to be an art of the deal, Georgia style.
All right.
I agree.
Well, less than a month from now, early voting begins in the presidential primary in Athens. Some voters raised concerns about privacy, saying the text in the new machines was so large that others could see who you're voting for. Some board members also worried whether there would be enough outlets for all the machines and the printers at some of the precincts. Phil, you've seen these machines. Do you think that's reason for concern?
No, that's bogus. I was at the Capitol and I've tested the machines. I think we all have. And, you know, if you've got somebody trying to lean over and look to see how he's voting, I mean, they'll be thrown out of the polling place. So you really can't see because there's borders on where they are.
After Iowa, is the pressure on? I don't want to bring up Iowa.
Oh, bring up Iowa.
No.
Let's talk about
our viewers don't like it when we don't talk about Georgia topics. But after Iowa, is the pressure on, or is the pressure off of Georgia now?
It is on. I mean, because we've spent over $100 million on these new voting machines. And so the only good thing is that we have now seen what happened at Iowa. And so I know that the Secretary of State's office is going to do multiple rounds of testing. But trust me, that the good thing is that, and I think the people have the right to express their concerns, whether the text size is too big or too small. We want to get all these kinks out now, because remember, at the end of the day, you want people to feel that their elections are handled fairly and securely. And so we got to make sure we get it right.
You know, there were some issues, Kathy, with electrical outlets and wiring, you know, small issues that really cause some big problems. And, you know, now we do have printers added to computers and machines. So could this be an issue?
Well, it can. I do some advising for Verified Action, so I'm looking at this pretty closely. And I think that the experience that we had in the special election down in South Georgia recently pointed out some of those things. Clearly, training is going to play a big role. Where people got a lot of training, things went fairly smoothly. Where they didn't get a lot of training, you know, there were some hiccups along the way. But we're going to get our first benchmark next Friday on Valentine's Day, when the rollout of the machines to all of the jurisdictions is supposed to be complete. There's about 50 more that need to get put out. Then you got to figure out if you can plug them all in and get them working. So we're a long way from being ready for the presidential primary. All
right, we'll be talking about it, of course. And coming up, President Trump weighs in on Georgia's second Senate race. Again, stay tuned.
Have a question or comment for the Georgia Gang? Email them at georgiagang@foxtv.com.
A man who has been an unbelievable friend of mine and spokesman, and somebody that I really like. And I know, Kelly, you're going to end up liking him a lot. Something's going to happen that's going to be very good. I don't know. I haven't figured it out yet. But Doug Collins, where is he? Where is Doug? You have been so great. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much.
Some very interesting words from President Trump at his press conference on Thursday afternoon addressing Senator Kelly Loeffler. President Trump there saying to her that she was going to end up liking Congressman Doug Collins. But Phil, everyone is trying to figure out what those words really mean. Something was going to happen and it was going to be good.
Well, here's what my sources in D.C. and actually in Georgia are saying. The Loeffler people actually, during the impeachment trial, went to the White House and to the Trump people and said, do we really need to have a split in the Georgia Republican ranks this November when we're looking at a special election and with Doug Collins and with Kelly Loeffler running in a free-for-all against a Democrat or a Libertarian or whoever? And so this has been on the president's mind. It was obviously on his mind when he was doing his well-deserved victory acquittal lap there. So I think what's going to happen, and he says he hadn't figured it out yet, but odds are he will figure something out. Could it be a job for somebody? I think if I were with the Loeffler camp, I would say, how's my ad campaign going to do? How's my introduction going? How's my marketing going for the next couple months? And let's see what the poll numbers are. For Doug Collins, I don't think he has a solid commitment from the president for an endorsement, because you can see that he is stuck in neutral right now.
Well, Theron, is kind of funny to see Dan McClagan back in the mix. I think he has some funny one-liners, and his was on behalf of Doug Collins that I'm sure the president will find a more suitable job for Kelly Loeffler.
Yeah, that was definitely, I know Dan watches the show, so that was a good one from him.
He's the campaign manager.
Yeah, and so, but just looking at the clip again, Lori, and thank you for showing it to me again, because I have to say I wasn't watching the president take his victory lap. But to me, I think he paid more deference to Doug Collins. I mean, he did mention the senator's name, but he's basically saying, this is my friend, he's a great person. And so I predicted last week, and I know, Janelle and Phil will back me up on this, is that once the trial was over, President Donald Trump was going to insert himself again in this race. And so I think it's not over. I think it's a lot of drama to come.
Janelle, talk about also, though, we know the National Republican Senatorial Committee is backing Kelly Loeffler. Yeah. And we know that now, the president does have this loyalty to Mitch McConnell, who's also backing Kelly Loeffler. How does that play into this, the loyalty issue on that side of it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I will give our friend Theron the credit on that one. He did call that. And full disclosure, I am on the Loeffler team as an honorary co-chair, as an unpaid position. However, I think that what we're seeing when you have these organizations that are backing Senator Loeffler is that they understand that she is suitable for the role. I think that she is, as of right now, the only one who's actually done the role and is actually in the role. So she knows more than the congressman at this point. But I will also say that when it comes down to these organizations, I think that we do have to be careful not to start mudslinging too early. I think that's really important on either side because of the fact that, it kind of leaves you with nowhere to go as we get into the heat of it all. And I think that's really important to pay attention to.
So, Kathy, does Raphael Warnock and the Democrats rise above all of this and just let the Republicans fight it out?
Oh, I would. I would let them spend some money on each other and just create havoc for each other's campaigns and then continue to build a base. Warnock had a great rollout, I think. It looked very well orchestrated, did a good job. So if I were him, I'd just step back and let the fray happen.
Well, Phil, and we did see this week, the race took a really nasty turn. The Club for Growth targeting Doug Collins. Collins fired back with an ad referring to Senator Loeffler as basically a fake farmer with rotten friends.
Well, I had to laugh.
Do they need a reminder, though, that there are Democrats in the race?
Right.
Well, that's right. It is a free-for-all. I think we're looking at, like, the Club for Growth is a 501c4 named after the IRS code. And Theron, you're as familiar with this as I am. Someone can stroke a huge check to a PAC, either on the Democrat side or Republican side, and then they'll go after whoever and run them over with a bus. And so I thought it was a very unfair ad against Doug Collins. But that's how it's all legal. And you're going to see, you talk about money, you're going to see more money. We've talked about this than ever before pour into Georgia for this race. Now, the good news for Kelly Loeffler is she's got a lot of money to self-fund.
Yeah.
Can I just say, I am so glad to hear Phil's campaign finance reform and that Citizens United should be turned over. This is a great day in Georgia politics.
I thought it was just me.
I heard it.
Let me clear it up. I'm a huge supporter. Money is free speech, yet the liberals don't understand that.
Yeah. That's not what I thought you said, but that's
okay. At the end, I think when we all settle it all down, I think we have to think about what the voters want to hear. And I don't think the voters want to hear, like I said, mudslinging from any side. I think we want to know, do you care about what we care about, and what are your issues, and what are you going to do to make our lives better?
Well, earlier we did mention Iowa, and I wanted to kind of focus on Georgia on this because there was a lot of talk. I think at the time of this taping, we still don't know the results in Iowa, which is a darn shame. But, there is this talk about should Georgia maybe play a bigger role in the caucus layout, or really a change in the way the caucuses are done. I mean, Theron, what do you think about that?
Well, we should. And, we only have 4 states that are still operating with the caucus system. It's Iowa, Nevada, North Dakota, and Wyoming. And so many people are saying that Iowa and New Hampshire are really not a good depiction of America, and basically as far as primary voters. And so I do think that we are going to move forward to eliminating the caucuses because I just think they're just so hard to manage. In 2016, they reduced 10 states from the caucuses, but I think Georgia will be an excellent southern state to be on the first day of the primary schedule. And let's just have one in the West, one in the Midwest, one in the Northeast, and one in the South. And I think Georgia should definitely be in that conversation.
Kathy, since you advise Fair Fight, is that something that's kind of going to be in the mix? I mean, Fair Fight could really set up shop in Iowa right now.
Yeah, I don't know anything about any of that, but I think Iowa's over. I think we should move on from it. That's my personal opinion, and kind of get on with it and start to get into some states that have a little more diversity, that have a more democratic process than what we're seeing in these caucuses. It's a nice tradition. It's interesting, but I think we've just demonstrated for a whole lot of reasons why it's time to move on.
And it's outdated. All right, well, coming up, fall back, spring forward. Should we continue with daylight savings time? One Georgia lawmakers wants your opinion, so we'll talk about it next.
Join the discussion on the Georgia Gang Facebook page and watch past episodes on the Georgia Gang YouTube channel.
Republican State Rep Wes Cantrell wants Georgians to weigh in on whether to do away with daylight savings time. He wants voters to weigh in with a non-binding referendum. You could keep the annual time change, switch to year-round standard time by winding the clocks back in the fall, or switch to daylight savings marked by moving clocks ahead early in the spring. So I think we talked about it. I don't like losing an hour, but I do like gaining an hour. Yeah. Can we do that?
Absolutely. That's what I was going to say. Is that I'm pretty sure it's the springing forward that people want to get rid of. But I think there's a lot of questions around this. Number one question is, would that mean that Georgia will be an hour off from everyone else on the East Coast? Or is this something that's going to happen in other states? Or where do we fall? I'm a little confused about that part. I don't know if I think it's that big of an issue, but maybe it is to some people.
There were a lot of people weighing in on social media everywhere.
It would be nice to have a non-binding referendum. I do say one thing, though. I wish when it's dark and when you got school children out there waiting for the bus, that is a problem.
Well, I would just say we got to make sure that we stress consistency, because what he's also proposing other states can do too as well. So to Janelle's point, I don't want neighbors in Alabama and Mississippi or North Carolina, South Carolina have different times. I think it needs to be some consistency amongst states.
All right. Well, Atlanta Public Schools may soon do away with Columbus Day. Students and staff would still get the day off, but it would be recognized as Indigenous Peoples Day instead. The board could vote on the change very soon. Kathy, this is something happening kind of across the country.
Mm-hmm. It is, and I think it's a good move. I think I wish I could remember the board chair's quote about it, but basically there's a lot of different history we need to examine. This is something that people are talking about, and it gives a broader perspective on the history of our country, and I think it's a good thing to do.
Well, it's typical political correct garbage by the liberals. They attack history. They want to rewrite history. What's wrong with just honoring someone who was an explorer who discovered large chunks of our continent? And I would think that, yes, you can bring in indigenous peoples. The whole history of the world are some groups doing things to other groups, wars and all this kind of stuff, movement, migrations. Why do you always have to dynamite what is our history?
Yeah, I would say I think I care more about what is being taught and the story that's being provided to our children than I do the name, so to speak, and making sure we get accurate history. I've always been an advocate of, changing, even when it comes down to how do we communicate about African American history. I don't think we talk about Black Wall Street and the heroes that came out of our community as much as we talk about slavery and Jim Crow. So I think it's more so about the storyline than anything else that I care more about.
Okay. One issue that has come up this week also is Democrats are revisiting the issue of in-state tuition for all students. And I think that the rule is that they want all students who have graduated from high school, a Georgia high school, and have been enrolled in a Georgia high school for at least 3 years would get in-state tuition. Now, this is something that the Board of Regents dealt with, I think, a couple years ago. I remember covering it several times. There were several protests also at the Board of Regents in support of it also. Theron, do you want to weigh in on this issue?
I think it's a good move by the Democrats, and let's also give Chairman Brandon Beach, who also introduced the bill to try to basically give in-state students more of a preference for in-state enrollment. And so I think the two could probably be combined in some type of way. But the bottom line is that we're losing bright minds every single day that are leaving our states and going to other states. And we want to keep those high school students here in Georgia. And one of the ways that we can do it is to try to offer them in-state tuition.
Phil, this was a very divisive political issue a few years back. Do you see that still?
Well, why is it divisive? Because you'd be including illegal aliens, and they, of course, steal slots from our own citizens and legal people. Just to clarify, the state law is that you cannot give in-state tuition to illegal immigrants. And it should stay that way. The law is, and the Regents have supported the state law, that in the top 5 universities, illegals can't get that. And so I think we ought to just, if you're going to do this legislation, make sure you have that amendment where, again, the Democrats always want to have, looking out for illegal immigrants and not U.S. citizens.
Look, first of all, I know Catherine, let's refer to them as undocumented.
Oh, that's, I'm going to call them what they are. It's a legal term. You don't like that.
But these students are here. These students have proper documentation to be here. Right. And they have to have attended a Georgia high school for 3 years. That's a higher bar.
But if they're subject to deportation, why do we give them
If they're subject to deportation, then they'll be deported at the appropriate time. But they are in this country legally at the time. They have the proper.
They're not illegal.
They are here with the proper documentation to be able to stay. And
it's temporary. It is temporary.
Well, but
you're distorting this.
Yeah, I think we're confusing people.
Yeah, but you're saying that they're illegal aliens, and that is
they
also
are, and they're subject to deportation.
Well, I do think we're confusing. Yeah, I think we're confusing. People who have proper documentation and visas and things of that nature with people who are here illegally and illegal immigrants. So I think we do need to decide about that. But I do think that citizens and those who are full citizens should get first dibs at this.
All right, we will revisit this issue because it is a good talker, and I'm sure that we'll be discussing this. The U.S. Supreme Court will also weigh in on that issue later this year. Coming up, we'll have winners and losers. Stay tuned.
Time now for the week's winners and losers.
I think I'm going to go first, if that's okay. Hala Manomag is my winner because she's the first female president and CEO of the Atlanta Metro Chamber. She announced that she is stepping down after 6 years on the job. The person who will replace her will have very big shoes to fill. They have such a strong internal team there. If you've ever had the chance to really sit down with Katie Kirkpatrick, she's the chief policy officer there. I think she would just be a fabulous candidate. She's another strong female. She knows the issues inside and out, so I think she would be really good. So that's my winner. I'll let you all weigh in, or I will let you all do your winners and losers.
All right,
Janelle,
awesome.
Go ahead.
Okay, so my winner is Justice Clarence Thomas. He had a documentary that was released this past week, and I went to go see it. It was an awesome, awesome documentary. I think everyone should check it out. And then President Trump, of course, on delivering an awesome State of the Union speech and being acquitted. So it was a good week for the president. My loser this week is Joe Biden and his poll numbers. I think that people put a lot of energy into Biden to the point where we wasted a lot of time with the impeachment debacle in order to push Biden, and now his polls are falling, so it's just a waste of time.
Kathy?
Well, the Oscars are happening, and I did see a few movies this year, so I'm going to make a little bet here. I think Parasite, in addition to winning the best international film, I think it's going to get Best Picture tonight. And if you haven't seen it, it's a great movie. My losers are the 12,000 kids in foster care in Georgia. They're being manipulated again with this foster care bill that just got introduced. I think the speaker's got this on his radar screen, but we've got to do a better job for kids in Georgia. And right now, now foster kids are kind of in the crosshairs, and that's not a good thing.
Okay, Theron?
Definitely want to celebrate Black History Month, and so February is a month where we celebrate our history, and so definitely we'll be saying that throughout the month. Also, want to give a big shout out to Southern Company. I want to be fully disclosed, they're a client of mine, but they gave $50 million to historically Black colleges and universities, and Chris Womack, who's over there, led that effort. And then lastly, I want to give a big shout out to Delta Airlines. They donated $400,000 to the MLK Jr. National Historic Park. And so definitely want to commend all these philanthropic activities that are going on with some of our corporate leaders.
And Delta's done that before, too, so good.
Kathy, that movie Parasite, was that the story of Nancy Pelosi? Anyhow, I've got a winner. Of course, yes, the Trump acquittal was a good thing. Our Constitution Republic is better for it. My winner is the Ports of Savannah. They have got record-breaking everything going with their shipping, but they just purchased 145 acres of land where you can put 1 million more of those cargo containers. That's great. And one last one, Georgia students are now 17th in the nation on their advanced placement test. That is great. The class of 2019, we're beating most other southern states.
And they're all getting
and we're doing better than Iowa. We're doing better than Iowa on the Iowa skills test.
All right.
After this week, that doesn't surprise me. All right, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll see you again next week.
The opinions expressed in this broadcast are those of the panelists appearing in this program.